Stephen Miller strode into the congressional hearing room with his characteristic poise, an aura of controlled confidence surrounding him. His expression, sharp and unreadable, gave nothing away. The former senior advisor to President Trump, long infamous for his uncompromising stance on immigration, adjusted the knot of his navy blue tie and smoothed the crisp line of his white shirt before settling into the witness chair. A hushed current of tension swept through the room. Staffers whispered in corners, camera lenses focused, and lawmakers prepared themselves for what promised to be one of the most contentious hearings of the session. Across the table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm yet laser-focused, the bold red of her blazer cutting through a sea of gray suits. Her reputation preceded her, brilliant, unflinching, and unafraid to challenge authority. Today would show why that reputation was well-earned. Few inside the chamber could have predicted how this exchange would unfold. Miller began his opening statement with his usual disciplined tone, outlining his vision of immigration enforcement as a matter of national integrity and constitutional authority. Crockett, however, didn't so much as blink. Her eyes never left him, following every phrase, every calculated pause. When the moment finally arrived for her to speak, Miller leaned slightly forward, lips curling into a confident half-smile, the kind of smirk that suggested he didn't take her seriously. "Congresswoman," he interrupted halfway through her first question, his voice cool but dismissive, "with all due respect, I don't think you fully understand the complexities of immigration law." The remark landed like a spark in dry grass. The hearing room fell into uneasy silence. Aides shifted in their seats. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence. Miller's confidence had crossed into arrogance, and he had just made a costly mistake. What followed would soon flood social media and dominate cable news. Crockett leaned forward, unshaken, her tone as measured as it was lethal. Her response, sharp, factual, and impossible to refute, would leave Miller visibly off balance. By the time she finished, the gallery was buzzing, the chairman pounding his gavel to restore order. This was more than another Capitol Hill argument. This was Jasmine Crockett demonstrating that preparation and precision could dismantle even the most seasoned power player. Before we dive deeper into this confrontation, make sure to let us know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button for real-time coverage of Congress's most unforgettable moments. Because what happened between Stephen Miller and Jasmine Crockett didn't just spark debate, it revealed deep truths about power, accountability, and the modern political battlefield. Miller had entered the hearing room like a man used to control. At 39, he was already a household name, one of the chief architects behind some of the Trump administration's most polarizing immigration initiatives: the travel ban, the zero-tolerance policy, the family separation program. His slicked-back hair and austere demeanor added to his image as the intellectual backbone of hardline nationalism, a strategist who relished confrontation and never backed down. This hearing, focused on immigration enforcement and constitutional rights, had been his chance to reassert influence. Conservative outlets had hyped his appearance for days, predicting that he'd educate Democrats on the realities of immigration law. Supporters anticipated a performance. Detractors expected fireworks, but across from him sat a woman equally prepared and far more dangerous to his narrative. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 42, represented Texas's 30th district. A freshman lawmaker but a veteran attorney, she had spent years defending civil rights cases and dismantling prosecutorial overreach. Before Congress, she'd served in the Texas legislature, where her sharp intellect and legal acumen earned bipartisan respect. What most didn't grasp, certainly not Miller, was that Crockett never entered a room without knowing every statute, every precedent, every weakness her opponent might expose. This hearing wasn't political theater to her. It was personal. The committee chamber was packed to capacity, reporters elbow to elbow, activists filling the back rows, C-SPAN cameras trained on every movement. As the chairman struck his gavel, security officers lined the walls. "Today," the chairman began, "we will examine the constitutional impact of immigration enforcement practices implemented between 2017 and 2021. Our first witness is Mr. Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Donald Trump and current president of America First Legal. Miller adjusted the microphone and began his statement. "The policies enacted under my direction," he said firmly, "were both lawful and vital to the security of this nation. Any suggestion otherwise reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of executive power and immigration law." His delivery was precise, even defiant. Lawmakers on his side nodded approvingly. When questioning began, Miller handled each inquiry with effortless composure, brushing off criticisms with rehearsed ease. He even allowed himself small smiles whenever he believed he'd neatly sidestepped a challenge. Then the chairman called on Congresswoman Crockett. She gathered her notes deliberately, aligning the pages before leaning toward her microphone. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said in an even tone. Her voice carried clearly across the room. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to discuss the constitutional principle of due process, specifically as it relates to the family separation policy your office helped craft." At once, Miller's expression tightened. The words due process struck a nerve. The audience stilled. Every eye turned toward the exchange that was about to unfold. "Mr. Miller," she continued, "the Fifth Amendment guarantees due process to all persons within U.S. jurisdiction, not merely citizens. Yet, under your policies, thousands of asylum-seeking parents were separated from their children without meaningful hearings. How do you justify that under constitutional law?" Before she could finish, Miller leaned forward, raising a finger. "Congresswoman, I have to stop you there," he interjected sharply. "Your premise is incorrect. The Constitution doesn't grant the same protections to non-citizens attempting to enter illegally." The tension spiked, but Crockett didn't flinch. "I wasn't finished," she said calmly, cutting him off with authority. "And I'd appreciate the courtesy of completing my question before you respond." A ripple moved through the audience. Miller, visibly annoyed, gestured for her to continue. "By all means," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. Crockett met his gaze steadily. "As I was saying, the Supreme Court has long affirmed that due process applies to all persons within the United States. In Zadvitas v. Davis, the court held that even those present unlawfully are entitled to due process protections. Are you suggesting the Supreme Court got that wrong?" Miller shifted in his seat, the confidence faltering. "That case addressed a different issue," he replied stiffly. "You're misunderstanding the context. Border enforcement operates under separate constitutional considerations." "Oh, I understand border enforcement just fine," Crockett said evenly. "What I'm asking for is a clear legal precedent, any Supreme Court case, that authorizes separating families without a hearing." "Can you name one?" A heavy silence blanketed the room. Members leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. "Congresswoman," Miller said finally, "you're conflating administrative enforcement with constitutional interpretation. The Department of Homeland Security has full statutory authority to detain individuals who cross illegally. Family separation was a byproduct of enforcing those laws." "That wasn't my question," Crockett countered sharply. "I asked for a legal precedent supporting that practice. A simple yes or no would do." A faint flush crept up Miller's neck. "The legal foundation," he said slowly, "is the plenary power doctrine. The executive branch has broad authority over immigration enforcement. If you were more familiar with the field, you'd already know that. The jab was deliberate, but ineffective." Crockett calmly lifted a document from her desk. "I'm very familiar with the plenary power doctrine, Mr. Miller," she replied. "I'm also aware of the 2018 Ms. L.V. ICE ruling, in which a federal judge ordered the government to reunite separated families, calling the practice shocking to the conscience and a clear violation of due process. Were you aware of that decision when you continued defending the policy?" Miller's jaw tightened. "That ruling was narrow," he said quickly. "It addressed implementation issues, not the underlying policy. And if we're discussing cases, perhaps we should also—" Crockett raised her hand slightly, her patience thinning. "Mr. Miller, I have limited time, and you've interrupted me 3 times now to avoid answering directly. So let's make this simple. Did you or your team ever receive legal guidance warning that family separation without hearings could violate constitutional rights? Yes or no?" A low murmur rippled through the audience. Miller hesitated, realizing she might have access to information he thought was private. Congresswoman, he said finally, voice measured but tense, as you're surely aware, internal legal deliberations are protected by executive privilege. What I can tell you is that every action we took was reviewed and approved by departmental counsel. The hearing room buzzed again. Cameras captured Miller's tightened jaw and Crockett's composed expression. For a brief moment, the balance of power in that chamber had visibly shifted. And everyone watching knew it. The tension in the room was electric. Crockett didn't need to say another word. Her line of questioning had already done what no one else in the room had managed to do. Put Stephen Miller on the defensive. Crockett nodded calmly and reached for another document resting on her stack of notes. Mr. Miller, she began, I have in front of me a memo dated April 23, 2018, written by Senior Department of Justice Attorneys to the Attorney General. In it, they express serious concerns about the constitutionality of separating families without providing individual hearings. Were you copied on this memo? Miller's eyes flickered with a hint of alarm. The first real sign that her questioning had caught him off guard. His response came fast and defensive. That appears to be a confidential document. Congresswoman, I'd question how it was obtained. Besides, internal memos don't necessarily reflect the department's final position, and I'm not going to comment on leaked materials. Before Miller could continue, the chairman intervened firmly. Mr. Miller, this document was obtained through official committee channels. Please answer the Congresswoman's question. Crockett seized the moment. So, Mr. Miller, were you aware of these legal objections? Yes or no? Miller shifted again. There were numerous legal discussions about immigration policy, he said vaguely. Different attorneys had different opinions. Crockett leaned in. So to be clear, you were aware that DOJ lawyers raised constitutional concerns about family separations carried out without due process. Miller's tone hardened as he interrupted for the fifth time. Congresswoman, what you're doing right now isn't oversight. It's political theater. These so-called gotcha questions are exactly why Americans lose faith in Congress's ability to have a serious policy discussion. If you want a spectacle, that's your choice. Before he could go further, Crockett's voice cut through as like a razor. Controlled, deliberate, and commanding. Mr. Miller, I'm not the one avoiding questions here. I'm a former defense attorney, and I'm asking how the policies you helped design comply with constitutional law. This isn't theater. It's oversight. That's our job. The temperature in the room shifted. The tension was visible, and even some of the Republican members looked uneasy as they watched the exchange unfold. Every camera was locked on them. The gallery sat frozen insolence, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Crockett pressed on, unshaken. Let's approach this from another angle. The Trump administration eventually reunited more than 5,000 children with their parents. If those separations were legally sound, Mr. Miller, would that reunification ever have been necessary? Miller jumped in again, his sixth interruption of the hearing. That reunification was an administrative decision, not a legal admission of wrongdoing. And frankly, Congresswoman, your interpretation continues to show a partisan. But before he could finish, Crockett delivered the line that would soon dominate social media headlines and every cable news discussion in the country. Her tone dropped, calm but sharp enough to cut through the noise. Mr. Miller, I've allowed you to interrupt me 6 times now. I've watched you dance around direct questions about the Constitution, an area I practiced in long before I came to Congress. So let's stop pretending. She set her papers aside and fixed her gaze on him. The entire room went silent. You walked into this hearing expecting deference, she said evenly. You assumed your time in the White House would intimidate a freshman congresswoman. But before I ever stepped into Congress, I spent years defending the constitutional rights of ordinary Americans, people who didn't have the privilege of hiding behind executive privilege or political spin. Miller's face tightened, his confidence wavering. So when you sit here and lecture me about immigration law, Crockett continued, while refusing to answer basic questions about due process, a principle I've defended every single day in court, you're not showing expertise. You're showing contempt for congressional oversight. Crockett lifted the DOJ memo for everyone to see. This document shows your own administration's lawyers warned that separating families without individual hearings likely violated the Constitution. Its guarantee of due process, those warnings were ignored. More than 5,500 children were separated from their parents. some permanently because basic records weren't even kept. That isn't border security, Mr. Miller. That isn't even competent governance. Miller tried to interrupt once more, but Crockett raised her hand to stop him. No, Mr. Miller, I've been patient. You've had your 6 interruptions. Now let me finish. Her voice remained steady, but the words carried unmistakable power. The policies you defended, she concluded, weren't just cruel, according to this memo, and multiple court rulings that followed. They were likely unconstitutional. The hearing room fell completely still. Cameras zoomed in on Miller's face, his earlier arrogance gone. Crockett leaned back slightly, her expression calm but resolute. In that moment, it was clear who had taken control of the room and who had just lost it. As the tension in the hearing room grew, Crockett leaned forward, her calm but firm tone filling the silence. "And here's what truly concerns me," she began. "You're neither to admit mistakes or help us build a better immigration system. You're here to defend what can't be defended and to present yourself as some kind of policy expert." Then came the line that would echo across every major platform within hours. "Mr. Miller, I may be new to Congress, but I'm not new to the Constitution. While you were busy writing press releases in the White House, I was in real courtrooms defending the rights you so easily dismissed. So don't confuse my freshman title with a lack of understanding. The difference between us isn't knowledge, it's respect." The moment broke the tension like a thunderclap. The gallery erupted into murmurs and gasps. Several Democrats tried to hide their smiles while Republicans shifted uneasily in their chairs. The chairman had to strike his gavel multiple times before order returned. Miller's face lost its color. The confident strategist was suddenly silent, his trademark smirk gone. For the first time, he seemed genuinely shaken. When he finally spoke, his words lacked conviction. "Congresswoman, I respect your legal background," he said carefully, "but I still believe the policies I supported were constitutional. The executive branch has the authority and responsibility to secure our borders." But the damage was done. Crockett had already dismantled his defense using his own administration's documents and logic against him. "My time has expired," she said calmly, "but I request that the Department of Justice memo outlining constitutional concerns about family separation be entered into the official record." "Without objection," replied the chairman, still struggling to restore order, as murmurs swept through the room. The entire exchange lasted less than 5 minutes, yet it felt historic. In that brief window, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had not only challenged Stephen Miller's narrative, but exposed the weakness in his defense with precision, patience, and legal expertise. She didn't rely on theatrics or partisanship. She relied on facts in the law. When questioning resumed, Millerstone was no longer commanding. His responses were cautious, even defensive. The dynamic had shifted completely. Crockett's exchange had changed the energy in the room, and soon it would change the national conversation. Within an hour, social media exploded. Clips of Crockett's final line, "While you were writing press releases, I was defending," the Constitution spread like wildfire. On Twitter, "Pat Crockett destroys Millerand F. Constitution defender" began trending worldwide. TikTok and Instagram flooded with short clips of Miller's stunned expression and Crockett's unwavering poise. Cable networks replayed the exchange on loop. CNN called it a textbook example of congressional oversight done right. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow described it as masterclass and accountability. Even conservative commentators on Fox News admitted Miller had been caught off guard, though some argued that Democrats were more focused on viral moments than real policy. By the next morning, major newspapers carried the story nationwide. Crockett corners Miller on family separation policy. The New York Times freshman congresswoman exposes weakness in Miller testimony. Washington Post. Texas lawmakers' legal skills redefine the hearing. Dallas Morning News for Jasmine Crockett. This moment marked a turning point. Her office was overwhelmed with messages of support. What began as a tense committee exchange had evolved into a viral, career-defining moment. One that proved expertise, composure, and truth could still rise above political spin. Overnight, Jasmine Crockett's online following exploded. Her social media accounts doubled in size as clips of the hearing spread like wildfire. Inside Congress, Democratic leaders quietly took notice. Word began to circulate that the freshman lawmaker might soon earn a more prominent committee role. By the weekend, invitations poured in from major Sunday political shows, eager to feature her perspective. Back in her Texas district, the reaction was electric. Supporters called her performance a proud moment for their community. "She showed exactly why we sent her to Washington," said one Dallas community leader. "She used her experience as a lawyer to hold powerful people accountable." Progressive organizations celebrated too, calling the exchange proof that electing lawmakers with real courtroom experience changes the tone of oversight. Representative Crockett demonstrated why having former public defenders in Congress matters, said one judicial advocacy group. "She brought legal expertise, not empty rhetoric." For Stephen Miller, however, the hearing was a different story. Known for staying on message and handling tough interviews with ease, he suddenly faced serious questions about his understanding of constitutional law. Legal scholars publicly challenged his interpretation of the plenary power doctrine, referencing the same Supreme Court rulings Crockett had cited. Miller's group, America First Legal, quickly released a statement defending his testimony and accusing Democrats of political theater. But even some conservative insiders admitted that he'd been caught off guard by Crockett's legal precision. The Department of Justice memo Crockett mentioned soon became headline news. Several major outlets filed Freedom of Information Act requests to uncover more documents about internal warnings related to the family separation policy. Congressional investigators announced plans to pursue further evidence of possible constitutional concerns that had been ignored. Beyond the immediate drama, the hearing sparked a much larger national debate. It refocused attention on the balance between immigration enforcement, executive power, and constitutional limits. Many observers noted that Crockett's questioning reframed the issue, shifting the focus from political slogans to fundamental legal principles. "What we saw wasn't just political theater," said a political science professor. "It was governance at its best. Professionals using expertise to hold officials accountable through facts, not ideology." Just a week later, a bipartisan group of senators referenced the hearing as they introduced new efforts for immigration reform. Their proposal aimed to strengthen border enforcement while ensuring policies respected constitutional protections. For millions of Americans who watched from home, the exchange stood out as a rare moment of truth in politics, a time when facts, law, and accountability took center stage over partisanship. When reporters later asked Jasmine Crockett about her viral moment, she stayed humble. "My questioning wasn't personal," she said. "I was about oversight, making sure every administration, no matter the party, follows the Constitution. That's not a partisan issue. That's an American one." The months later, the moment still echoed through Washington. When another former official was scheduled to testify before Congress, journalists began asking if he was ready for a Crockett moment. The phrase had already entered political vocabulary, shorthand for fact-based questioning that cuts through spin and exposes the truth. For Stephen Miller, the hearing didn't end his political influence, but it did crack the image of the unshakable strategist. For Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, it marked the defining moment of her early career, establishing her as a rising force in legislative oversight and a defender of constitutional principles. But the greatest impact was felt beyond politics. For the American people, the exchange served as a reminder of what democracy should look like. When real expertise meets accountability, when evidence outweighs partisanship, and when the Constitution stands as the ultimate test for every policy. Even months later, the video of that confrontation continued to circulate, gaining millions of views and thousands of comments. Viewers praised it as one of the rare congressional moments where truth and integrity shone brighter than political spin. If you found this deep dive into the Crockett-Miller exchange insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay tuned for more political analysis and real moments of accountability that shape American democracy. And let us know in the comments which political showdowns should we break down.